Ladies and gentlemen, you might remember Buck from my video about shadows being a more reasonable explanation than functional plane-size holograms in 2001. Nothing against the guy, I just think that maybe he isn't surrounded by people who are able to explain some very basic things, but fortunately, I'm here to help. It's the least I can do after Buck has introduced me to a conspiracy I've never heard of before, the Lost Empire of Tartaria. Tartaria, or Tartary, is alleged to have been somewhat similar to a Russian version of Atlantis, where a once great civilization fell and was wiped out of the history books. Similar to Atlantis, which will be a topic of another day, the Tartaria described in the conspiracy is fictional. But there's actually more evidence for Tartaria than there is to Atlantis. For example, we can see Tartaria shown on maps throughout history, but when we look at these maps, we notice something strange. Nobody seems to be able to agree on where exactly Tartaria is. Is it here? Or what about here? Or perhaps here? But why might this be the case? Well, I suspect it's because maps are hard to make, but lucrative to sell. If you're going to convince someone to buy one, you may try to convince them that your map has more information than the competition. I mean, look at this map of North America. That's not there. And if you're the competition and you see another map with a brand new empire, maybe you also include it in your map. It's easier than actually traveling to the location to map it yourself, right? And this actually is why we have phantom settlements or paper towns, depending on what you want to call it. Map makers would add fictitious locations to see if anyone is copying their work, but that's a different topic for another day. But an entire empire is very different from a single town, right? Surely people would know better. Oh, honey, bless your heart. Before we really get into things, I'd like to answer the burning question that some of you may have. Is Tartaria where tartar sauce is from? No, but actually kind of. Tartar sauce was made to accompany beef tartare. Tartare. I don't know. I don't eat it. It's raw ground or minced beef. Hence why I don't eat it. That sounds terrible, although some people seem to like it. It was named Tartare. Tartare. I don't know. I'm breaking things. Sorry. It was named that because of a caricature of Turkic warriors putting raw meat under their saddles to tenderize the meat before eating it. The idea was that these people were uncivilized or barbaric. Barbaric. From the word barbarian, which originally meant someone who doesn't share the Greek language and customs. Now, I don't mean to get distracted, but didn't barbarians have some sort of empire called Barbaria? Oh, yeah, here it is. Or wait, it's over here, or maybe it's here. Perhaps it's this island, or perhaps it's this part of the world. Or perhaps this part of the world was close enough to Greece to share some of the language and customs, whereas this part of the world wasn't, but was still close enough for Greece to interact with, giving it the designation of Barbaria, or essentially land that is different from ancient Greece. Food for thought. But digest it quickly, because the next course is being served. If we can establish that sometimes maps designate an area as a general, these people are different than us, then surely we could assume the label of Tartar or Tartary or Tartaria could be the exact same thing. And wouldn't you know it, it was. But before we discuss the details, let me tell you about Marco Polo. Marco was a merchant who traveled to China and back along the Silk Road, a trading route for this exact thing. However, unlike most, if not every other merchant, Marco wrote about his adventures in Eastern Asia extensively. So Europe knew about themselves and they knew about Eastern Asia, but what about this middly bit? Well, that was controlled by the Mongols, and you might remember them as part of the reason the Great Wall of China was built. Kind of a big deal, right? Pretty aggressive people, lots of violence, much less civilized than Italy or China, right? Yeah. The western part of the Mongols refer to themselves as Tatars, and these were probably the ones that Europeans interacted with the most. But with them being so uncivilized and aggressive, wouldn't it be a funny little joke to add an R in there, making it Tartar, as if they were coming into Europe from Tartarus, which you may recognize as the place where the chaotic and violent titans of ancient Greece are imprisoned. Considering Pope Innocent IV sent the Mongols a letter in 1245 stating, quote, "We are strongly compelled, not without cause, to be astonished that you, as we have heard, having invaded so many regions of the Christians as well as those of other peoples, laid waste to these with a terrible devastation. and that up to this time, you, not ceasing to send pillaging bands in your continuous anger into further regions, with the restraint of natural reason broken and making no exception for age or sex, you have raged against all indifferently with the sword of your anger. End quote. That's a lot of big words. I might have gotten some of that correct. Perhaps we can understand why a cartographer might prefer to just slap a Tartaria on that part of the world and trust nobody was going to come out with anything more accurate anytime soon, because they'd probably die if they tried. And that brings us back to the conspiracy, which generally suggests 4 things without significant evidence. 1, the Tartarian Empire was a sophisticated empire that spanned the globe, or flat Earth, depending on who is spreading the conspiracy. 2, most of the evidence was destroyed in a series of mud floods. 3, many famous structures around the world are actually Tartarian, despite all evidence to the contrary. And 4, governments are trying to destroy what's left of the structures and have created fake documents to attribute the architecture to other people for an unknown reason. So how do we detect this deception? Let's look at the original tweet, which claims the Arkansas state capitol was built by Tartarians long ago. We couldn't have built that. Look at the shacks next to it. They're so much less advanced. Our first clue is that they provide no evidence. On the contrary, we can provide photos of the building being built. Sure, they can say that these are faked, but the burden to prove that is on them. Otherwise, they're committing a burden of proof fallacy. What's that? The government has lied to us in the past, so we should assume these images are false? They've told the truth in the past too, but I don't see the suggestion that we should always trust the government because of that. This is what's known as a genetic fallacy, where information is deemed irrelevant because of its source and not because of its content. Merely saying these photos could have been faked does not mean that they have been faked. Otherwise, that would be an appeal to probability, which is also a fallacy. Many fallacies, so many fallacies. But it looks ancient, therefore it is ancient. Well, that's a false equivalence fallacy. Just because this building shares traits with ancient structures does not mean it is an ancient structure. It was designed to look like an ancient structure because it looks nice. That's a nice looking sort of style. We like that. I like that. They like that. We don't build everything like this because it's very, very expensive, but we build some things like that, or we have in the past, and I assume some people continue to do so. So instead of suggesting the building is ancient because a bunch of shacks were built next to it, perhaps we might assume that the people who built the shacks were a little less inclined to spend, adjusted for inflation, almost $72 million. Yeah, that's how much the building cost, the big fancy one. That's definitely not Tartarian. Stop it. To rip the argument into even smaller pieces, your argument is like saying the house I live in was built by Atlanteans because someone is living in a cardboard box on the street. Now, before you suggest nobody could build a building for $72 million because, I don't know, it would bankrupt the builder of the one got up to $165 million before he went bankrupt. And that's more than double. And is a private entity with, presumably, no government funding. Now, you're not going to tell me that that is Tartarian, are you? But what do you think? Is the government hiding the fact that nobody knows how to build with stone anymore? Was the Notre Dame Cathedral lit on fire to destroy it and conceal its Tartarian origins? Yes, that's a real part of the conspiracy theory that I've seen people suggest. I don't know why they would have had a change of heart and been like, you know what, let's actually save this building from being on fire because it's still there, shockingly. But hey, you know, what do I know? It's a conspiracy theory. It doesn't have to make sense. Let me know in the comments. Try to prove me wrong. I'll be pointing out more fallacies there if they come up. Like this video if you liked it, subscribe for more nonsense like this, and until the next time, be good, stay safe.